recording. No, just the recording. So, hi everyone. Yeah, I know. Everyone's busy. So, Conquest of the Carpathian Basin. Last time we were here, that was, when was that? A week ago? Maybe? Yeah. Well, last week we were not here. Friday or the week before. Okay, anyway. So the last thing I think we had was the lifestyle of the migrating Hungarians. Yes? No? Nothing like that? Okay. Have you seen anything that I put on classroom? Yeah. Okay. Anyway, so what we had in the previous lesson was the lifestyle of the migrating Hungarians. If you just very quickly open your map, try to find a map that shows the migration of the Hungarians. It looks something like this. Okay. So it says Magyar Népvándorlása. Okay. And also Honfoglalás. Try to find this very quickly. Yeah, it's the one. Okay. So if you have a look at it, you can see the migration coming from the edge of Europe, from the Ural Mountains. You can see different places where the Hungarians migrated through. This is what we had on the previous lesson. So we may check out the video and the presentation. Can you see the different places where the Hungarians stayed for some time? Okay. Places like Honfoglalás or and then later on they go to the Lydia. Can you see that one? So Lydia, which sea is it close to? Which sea is the Lydia close to? Which sea? See, you know the blue things on your map. So which sea is it close to? La Lydia. La Lydia. La Lydia. Have a look at the different areas that are circled. Those are the places that Hungarians inhabit. Yes, Other Sea and the Black Sea, basically. Other Sea is part of the Black Sea. Very good. Can you all see that one? Can you all see the sea? Yeah, okay. And then, what is the next place after Lydia? Adapters. Very good. Now, adapters means between rivers. So attackers means between, because between atel means river. So because there are a lot of rivers here, so between different rivers. And what do you think? What is the next step in the migration after attackers? Poland? No, the Hungarians didn't go to Poland. Bulgaria? No, the Bulgarians were the Bulgarians, so we are not Bulgaria. What is the next step? The final step? What's that in English? The Carpathian Basin, that's right. So this is where the Hungarians eventually arrived. We have a similar map here. So the Media, attackers, and then the Carpathian Basin, basically the place that the Hungarians inhabit. So in Hungarian, we call this process Honfoglalás. It means something to you from your previous studies. Hon meaning is synonym for home or homeland. Okay, or homeland. Now, in English, we usually say the conquest. Okay, so this homeland thing is missing. You could add conquest of the homeland or conquering the homeland of the Hungarians. Very often, it's just conquest of the Carpathian Basin. The word Foglalás, conquest, does it suggest a peaceful entry or a not so peaceful entry? A not so peaceful entry. Can you see any kind of countries in this region? Let's It's not so easy because it's not a colored map based on countries, but you may recognize, or some peoples, different nations living in the area. When the Hungarians are Slavic people, yeah, you can see southern Slavs, okay? The Bulgarians are nearby, yes, they have a Bulgarian Pilgrim or a Bulgarian empire that already exists in the region. Okay. Avars, yes, the Avars. If you have a look at the map below the bigger map, it shows the bigger picture. This is the Carpathian Basin, and you can see that in the middle it says Avars, which means there were already people living here. Okay? So the Hungarians did not arrive into a completely empty space, but it was inhabited by different people. Okay, what is this big border? It's more or less the Danube. Have a look at the legend. What's that? What kind of border is that? It's the border of the Frankish Empire. That's right, the Franks. Okay, so basically, if you have a look at the map on your left, on the left-hand side of your page, you can see the Frankish kingdom, Frankish Empire, and it stretches into what becomes the Hungarian kingdom later on. So basically, it was a sort of a border region of different countries. There wasn't a real country in the Carpathian Basin, but there were different countries in different areas of it, and there were different people living. So if it's not a fully fledged country, is it easier to conquer? I would say it is easier because it doesn't really belong to one nation who will defend it like, okay, this is our homeland and we don't want to give it away. It's more like a border region, not so densely inhabited region of different peoples, of different empires. And in the middle, there were some Avars living, but not a lot of them. Okay, so and that made the conquest quite possible. So if you just have a look at the Carpathian Basin, it's not an area which was completely deserted and nobody lived here before. You can see that it was inhabited since prehistoric times. Just think about the different caveman bones that were found here, okay, like so since prehistoric times, humans lived here, and then different peoples like the Gepids or the Romans. You remember the name of the Roman province in Transdanubia? What was that? What was the name of this province? Just the other side of the Danube. Pannonia. You probably know the expression Pannonia. That was the name of the Roman province in Transdanubia. So the Romans were here. They lived here for like 400 years. Later on, the Huns arrived, led by Attila, but then their empire also disappeared, and the Avars appeared. The Franks came in 7th, 8th century. Slavs were already here. So it was an area inhabited by all sorts of peoples, but there wasn't like a strong kingdom or a strong empire. So the Hungarians were able to come inside the whole thing. Okay, so what triggered the conquest? Okay, where we stopped was Etelköz the last time, and it was quite close to the Carpathian Basin. So what do you think? Did the Hungarians every now and then rode in and looked around? Were they mapping the area? Different skirmishes? Yes, so they already knew about the whole area. They knew it's a good place. These are nomadic people, so what do they need? Plain land with a lot of grass for their animals. They need rivers, they need water, maybe a bit of agriculture. And also the mountains. Why are the mountains good? The Carpathian Mountains all around it. Yes? Or why are the mountains good, generally speaking? Like a border, okay? Or when the enemy comes, is it protection? That's right, it gives protection. So basically, there is a very nice natural protection. It gives very nice natural protection. Has anyone been hiking, mountaineering in the Carpathians? Have you ever been there on an excursion trip? How high are the mountains in the Carpathian Mountains? 1,000 meters? these altimeters is it very rocky and difficult to go through? Yes, it is. Okay, so you shouldn't think about something like a map that's like this. Carpathians are really, really high mountains. Not so easy to go through, especially not with a lot of horses and so on. So how could the Hungarians come in? Have a look at your map. It will help you a little bit. It shows all these red arrows. How could the Hungarians go through the Carpathian Mountains? How can you go through with a lot of animals and lots of people, any kind of mountain? You go around, you can go around, you know, it's all around. The water, maybe you use some kind of river. You have to, what? Yes. Paddle. Yes, what's that in English? It's a pass. Okay, it's called a pass, like a Beretskei pass. That's right. So there are some places in the mountains where we can go through. These are called passes. And so the Hungarians used these passes to enter the whole thing. Of course, later on, you have to defend these places very well so that the enemy is not doing the same. So what exactly triggered the conquest was, interestingly, it wasn't a planned conquest. They knew about the area, so they knew it's a good place, but they didn't really plan on moving the whole Hungarian people in there. What happened was an attack by the so-called Pechenyek people. In Hungarian, we call them Besenyők. And in 895, there was a surprise attack from the east. So the Hungarians were here, and the Pechenyeks attacked from the east. So they had to flee, they had to escape. So basically the conquest of the Carpathian Basin was triggered by an escape from another attack. The main force, most of the Hungarian military was fighting here in Bulgaria. As it often happened that they were engaged in different wars, and so they couldn't defend the women, children, and the elderly in attackers, so all of them had to flee. Later on, the Hungarian main force came back and joined the movement towards the Carpathian Basin. So interestingly, it wasn't really planned. It just happened because they had to escape from the Pechenyeks. So coming from the east, and so the Hungarians moved on to the west. So there is a defeat, basically. So the whole thing starts with a major military defeat in attackers, and then they move on westwards to the Carpathian Basin. Now, for quite some time, the historians were uncertain about the date, so when this exactly happened. But we are quite sure today that this all happened in 895, so that is the official date of the conquest of the Carpathian Basin. But if you have a look at here, you have different dates because it took many years to conquer the whole area. So it wasn't just a one-off, one-year attack and then it ended, but it took about 10 years to conquer the whole Carpathian Basin. The Hungarians knew it's a safe haven, so the Pechenyeks will probably not follow them into the basin. So that means that that could be a safe place for them for any kind of attack. And then they realized that it's actually a good place to live, a good place to settle down. And so this is why the Hungarians stayed for the long run. Now, Almos was the leader of the Hungarians at the time, but he was blamed for the defeat, for not being able to defend the Hungarian people from the Pechenyek attack. So interestingly, he was executed before the Hungarians entered the Carpathian Basin. This was, well, historians have different theories for this. He was quite old at that time. He was the leader of the Hungarians for about 40 years. So maybe this was sort of a ceremonial sacrifice to win the goodwill of the gods. And also there was sort of a tradition that you cannot be a leader for such a long time. So maybe this is why he was executed, and partly because of the blame for the defeat. And so his son Arpad became the leader of the Hungarians. So he's the prince or fejedelem, and he became the leader of the Magyar tribal alliance. And so in the tradition, we have Árpád as the leader who leads the Hungarians into the Carpathian Basin. Okay, and you can have, of course, a lot of paintings about him, famously on a white horse, which becomes sort of a symbol of the early Hungarian leaders and ancient Hungarian leadership. Okay, so we have Árpád, and of course, he's one of, and also the other clan leaders joined him with the 7 tribes. Okay, so now here you have the same painting, but it's the big version by Mihály Munkácsy. It's quite a famous painting about the arrival of the Hungarians, and there are all sorts of different soldiers and figures here. People in the background who have lots of weapons, they are Hungarian soldiers, and here in the foreground you have the different Slavic and Avar people who bow down and declare that they accept the Hungarians as their leaders, they accept their conquest. There was a bit of fighting going on with the people in the regions, but eventually the Hungarians managed to prevail, they managed to win. Okay, so this is Prince Árpád. If you see this painting, that's the most popular depiction of him. Of course, this is all based on fantasy. Do we have any contemporary pictures of him? No, we don't really have any pictures. We don't really have any paintings, nothing basically about Árpád. All we have is a few texts that say what he looked like. So all this is based on the fantasy of the painter and on some historic clothing and weapons and so on, because the painter was studying all these relics and weapons, so he tried to be very authentic, but he had to use his imagination, as very often in this period. Okay, so how did the conquest go, and what were some of the countries in the region? We have the Moravian principality up here, led by Svatopluk, but Svatopluk died in 894. So when the king dies, there is always a weakening of that country. So that also helped that the Moravians were not that strong, because their leader just died a year before the Hungarians arrived. We have the Franks, the Frankish kingdom. It's more or less a border region for them. They don't really have a lot of soldiers in here, so that helps in conquering. Basically, there is no strong state in this region. There is no strong state in the basin. So the Hungarians were able to come into the area and establish their own tribal state. There's also the legend of the white horse. You probably know that one, connected to the negotiations between the Moravians and the Hungarians, asking for entry. Now, so entering through the passes, as we mentioned, the most famous one is the Verecký Pass. Which country is that in today? Do you know that one? So that's up somewhere here. So which country is that today? You probably know the countries neighboring Hungary today. Which one is to the northeast? Yes? Yes, in English? Try to just pronounce it in English way. U is you. Ukraine. That's right, Ukraine. Okay, or sometimes said the Ukraine. Okay, so it is in the Ukraine. And so, but it's also called Carpathian, you know, the region, okay, which is partly still inhabited by Hungarians, places like Verecký. Okay, and so there's not just one pass, but many different passes. You could see on your map that there are many different arrows coming in through the basin. All those red arrows, those have some sort of Hungarian troops coming in through some passes. The first area conquered was Transylvania, and then gradually they moved on towards the west to Transdanubia. Okay, now there's also another famous painting. Has anyone been to Honfoglalás? Yes, you've seen the rotunda, the round. Okay, is it quite big? How big is it? Yes, it's quite big. It's quite spectacular. It's a 360 degrees painting. It's not really a painting, it's a fresco, I would say. So it's painted on the walls. So what I'll try to do is give you a 2-minute tour around the circular painting by Mr. Carpathian. Okay, so we'll have a look at the video. Hopefully that works. Yep. Here we go. Okay, so we won't really have any sound, I think. It's just basically going, the camera just goes around. And we'll stop at different scenes and we'll see what's going on. Okay. Oh, we have some sound. I hope there's no advertisement. Yeah, so here is a famous painting, part of the painting with the tribal leaders, and Arpad, of course, you can always recognize him with the white horse. And here it's basically the wife, okay, coming with a cart, and they're decorated. Well, you see it's not the best quality. It is. This is the best quality we can get. And you can see that the landscape is not very inhabited. Well, of course, immediately the conquerors would start looting and robbing women, kidnapping and all that. You can see that there are no big cities, no big towns, a few villages here and there, but most of the area is quite empty, so not very densely populated. So this helps in gaining the territory. This helps the Hungarians to conquer the area and settle in. Because what they need in the first hand is just like in the steppe region, nomadic lifestyle, big empty areas where they can move around with their enemies. Now, this is also a sacrifice. What are they going to sacrifice? A horse. Okay, horse sacrifice by the Shama in the middle, or Taltos, to again, sort of a religious ritual to win the goodwill of the gods. Okay, as we move on, you can see some sort of river in the background, probably the Tisa River. And you can see that there's a lot of movement here. Some people try to resist, some people, the Avars, probably the locals, but the Hungarians come in with their quick horses and overwhelming numbers. So the conquest is quite successful from the very, very beginning. So most of the locals, they would come and ask for mercy, and they would say, all right, now you are the new leader, so we just accept your supremacy. Okay, so that was it. So if you have the chance, just go to Honfoglalás, and this is where you could see the original one. Of course, it's a lot bigger, it's quite spectacular. Okay, so we'll go back to our presentation. Okay, so let's see the different steps that of conquering the basin. So you can see it took about 10 years, 12 years, basically, and a series of victories. So again, if you have a look at your map, you will see the different movements around the Carpathian Basin, and you can see the different dates and years as well. So 895-96 is the entry into the basin through the different passes, and so the first areas were the upper reaches of the Tisa here, and Transylvania. So these were the first places where the Hungarians settled. But then they moved on a few years later to Transdanubia, where they attacked and conquered the area quite quickly. In 902, there was a major victory over the Moravians. If you have a look at on your map, you go on, there's an arrow going to the north that shows 902. So basically what we call Upper Hungary, or Felvidék, that region was more or less conquered by the Hungarians from the Moravians. Now, Pursan is the last spiritual leader, the last Kende, so this is going to be the end of what we call the dual principality, or kettős fejedelemség. There won't be a new Kende elected after him. He was murdered by the Bavarians, who were German-speaking people to the west. And so that started hostilities, and eventually there was a major battle in 907, the so-called Battle of Pozsony. And so in this year, the Bulgarians and both the Bulgarians and the Bavarians were defeated. Now, can you just find this battle on your map? So what can you find in Pozsony? So it's not very complicated. So show me on this map where it's Pozsony. Just point your finger. So just point your finger at the battle of Pozsony. Okay, not the top map, but the map at the bottom. The Carpathian Basin. You're looking at the Carpathian Basin. Not the big map, but the one that shows the bottom. Good. Well, maybe yeah, this is here. Can you see the back side? It says 907. See it? And there's a sign on the battle. The battle is typically two swords. Have you got it? Okay, so it's here. You need to find the Danube. Of course, if you have been to Pozsony, you know that the Danube goes through Pozsony. Okay, so that's the place where the Hungarians had a major victory. And that means that from the west, there won't be any trouble for some time. Right? So the Western people living to the west of the Carpathian Basin will not really attack the Hungarians for some time. So all these attacks and victories and conquests secured that the Hungarians are dominating more or less this region. Did it have a border? Did it have an exact shape of the country? No, it's just the area where the different tribes spread out and started to inhabit and dominate this area. Now, what are the advantages of the Carpathian Basin? We already mentioned a few. Is the land good for agriculture? Yes, very fertile land. Is it good for animal husbandry? Yes, big plain areas, a lot of grass. You can move around with your animals, so you can do your nomadic lifestyle without problem. Any rivers? Very good rivers, lakes, fresh water, everything available. Protection? Yeah, you have the Carpathian Mountains. So basically, it's an ideal place to establish some sort of a country. So the mountains give protection from outside attacks. We also have the Alps to the west. So that gives you extra protection. To the south, basically you have some more mountains. So basically it's completely surrounded, not just by the Carpathian range, but by other mountains as well. So it's like an island in the middle of sea of mountains. So good grazing grounds for the animals. There is fertile soil, arable land, and there are several rivers, water supply. It's good for transportation as well. So that will be an important connection to the outside world once it comes to trading. Later on, while the Hungarians were exploring the area more closely, they discovered that there are a lot of mineral resources, especially in Transylvania, especially in the mountainous regions. What do you think? What kind of mineral resources were found? What kind of useful things were mined in Hungary from the Middle Ages? Yes, who's that? Coal. Yes, they found coal. Okay. Any precious metals? What do you think? Were there any precious metal mines in Hungary back in the Middle Ages? Yes, gold and silver as well. Okay. So there were a lot of mines found, and that also is a big advantage of the Carpathian Basin. At one point in the Middle Ages, Hungarian kingdom produced most of the silver in Europe. So it's really, really a useful area. So what the Hungarians and Magyars decided to do is to stay for the long run, settle down, and of course also they had nothing else to do, because if you have a look at the map of Europe, could they go on into the west? No, because you have these huge empires, kingdoms, which are quite strong, like the Frankish Empire or Burgundy or different Italian territories. They didn't really want any sort of nomadic people come into their country and conquer it or settle down or anything. So basically this was the last possible place where the Hungarians could go, and there was no other way to move on. But we could also say it was the right moment, because maybe after like 100 years, they wouldn't have been able to settle down anywhere, might have perished. Okay, now just a few artifacts as the last thing from this period. Archaeologists found loads of different objects. So this is how we can have some kind of a picture of what a Hungarian soldier or average person might look like. And of course you have the horse decoration very often, as horses were most important animals. What is this one? You probably have seen. It's also quite fashionable these days. What is this called? It's worn here. Tarsolylemez, that's right. So tarsoly is like a small, I would call it a bag or something, and you can hold your precious items in it. And it's usually very nicely decorated. So very often archaeologists would find these tarsolylemez decoration things in. Okay, something we must mention from this period is the Hungarian runes, in Hungarian known as rovásírás. So most probably the Hungarians already had some sort of writing. There are again a lot of different theories about this, whether this comes from ancient civilizations or where it comes from Turkish tribes. All sorts of origins are mentioned by different theories. What is for certain is that in the 10th century, we have some artifacts, some archaeological finds that show the Hungarian runes. So probably it's a very, very old thing. And so it became the traditional writing of the settlers. They are the székelyek. So it's often called székely magyar rovásírás. So like to stress the settlers' role in this. And there's a sort of a revival today. A lot of people think that using these Hungarian runes sort of becomes Hungarian identity, even so that you can also have a book about it if you want to learn how to do it. Or if you go around Hungary, you would see a lot of places, place names written with these ones. Now, we'll do a bit of translation, okay? So try to read what is written. These are Hungarian words. Okay, so try to transcribe as if it was a code breaking or something. So you can see it's easy because one letter stands for one side. Okay, so try to. You can write down if you find it. Okay, we can do it together if you want to. Let's start with this one. So what letter is this? Anyone who finds it, just tell me. Ek, which means K. Okay, yeah. So it starts here. So it's K, same thing. A. Is it an A or an O? It's an A. What's next? Air. Okay. P. Up again. Yeah, next one. T. Okay. O. And K again. Carpathian is written like this with the Hungarian runes. Very nice. So try to find this one. Okay. R. Okay. P. Again. D. Okay. So Arpad. So what could be the long one? What was his title? Yes, Feydeler. That's right. So the long one is Feydeler. And how about the last one, the top? There is this DNA sign. H. Is it H?
No.
What is it? So this one.
I don't know.
Does anyone tell me? Okay, let's go for this one.
O.
O. Right. So something missing here. O. N.
F.
Okay.
O.
O.
Honfoglalás.
Honfoglalás. That's right. A plain hangman. Okay, so it's very nice, and a lot of people still use it. Okay, I learned it. It's basically an alphabet. It's used. So from early Middle Ages, the Hungarians had this type of writing. Now, if you want to write using the Hungarian runes, there is of course a website about this. So if you go to this ropásfordító.hu, and you can just type in anything, and it will just tell you what it looks like. So it's like a translator of the Hungarian runes. Okay, and so next time, the end of this topic. So the Hungarians arrived, they conquered much of today's Hungary and Greater Hungary, the Carpathian Basin. And so the next 100 years was spent by trying to decide what to do next. And we will see how well that went. Are Hungarians still living in the Carpathian Basin? Yeah, so probably they had the right choices because the Hungarians survived, as opposed to previous nations and peoples who perished. The Avars are not here anymore, the Huns are not here anymore, the Romans are not here anymore. So a lot of different peoples vanished from the Carpathian Basin. The Hungarians are still here to stay. Okay, very good. So that's the end for today. So this is how the conquest went of the Carpathian Basin. And next time we'll have a look at how we get from Prince Arpad to Saint Stephen, okay, which is another 100 years. And then we'll see how the country, the kingdom was established and how the Hungarians adopted Christianity. Okay, good. So thank you for being here, and I will stop the video now. Goodbye.